Okay, are we back? Give it a second. Okay, connection's looking better. Let me check this. Alright, it looks like we're back. Hopefully. Okay. Good, good. Let's see, I think you just cut off. Yeah, I mean, I record so that I can put it over on YouTube. It might. I mean, the internet's pretty bad out here. It's absolute garbage. Okay. Man, it is so bad out here. Well, I'll keep trying to read. I don't know if it's going to work very well. I mean, if worse comes to worse, I'll try again tomorrow. Or I'll record it and just post it. Okay. Doesn't look like it's disconnecting yet. Alright, let's try and read some more. Oh, I guess I could. It would take forever to download it, though. This way I just already have it in a folder, and it kind of shortens the time in between. The internet's really not good out here. I write a few lines in haste to say that I am safe and well advanced on my voyage. This letter will reach England by a merchantman, now on its homeward voyage from Archangel, more fortunate than I, who may not see my native land, perhaps for many years. I am, however, in good spirits. My men are bold and apparently firm of purpose. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to take my phone off the Wi-Fi real quick, just in case. Sometimes it's just too many devices on for this area. Let's see. I am, however, in good spirits. Yes, my men are bold and apparently firm of purpose. Nor do the floating sheets of ice that continually pass us, indicating the dangers of the region towards which we are advancing, appear to dismay them. We have already reached a very high latitude, but it is the height of summer, and although not so warm as in England, the southern gales, which blows us speedily towards those shores, which I so ardently desire to attain, breathe a degree of renovating warmth, which I had not expected. Checking. Okay. No incidents have hitherto befallen us that would make a figure in a letter. One or two stiff gales and the breaking of a mast are accidents which experienced navigators scarcely remember to record, and I shall be well content. If nothing worse happened to us during our voyage. Adieu, my dear Margaret. Be assured that for my own sake, as well as yours, I will not rashly encounter danger. I will be cool, persevering, and prudent. Or is it persevering? Yeah, persevering and prudent. Remember me to all of my English friends. Most affectionately yours, R.W. Shortening his name. Okay, now it's saying I'm live. I'm hoping it's working. We've got a few viewers in here. I'm so sorry my connection is utter garbage. You know what, maybe I'll just close out some of this stuff. Maybe that'll help. There we go. Letter number 4. To Mrs. Seville, England, August 5th. Very close to my birthday. My birthday's actually August 9th. So strange an accident has happened to us that I cannot forbear recording it, although it is very probable that you will see me before these papers can come to your possession. Last Monday, July 31st, we were nearly surrounded by ice. Now, it happens. Trust me, my streams mess up too. Yeah. Hopefully, the internet situation can be figured out, or I'll end up in an area with better internet. It's so bad out here. I mean, American internet in general is pretty much garbage. Yeah, they were supposed to change all of that in the 90s. I've said this in 2 other streams, but our infrastructure is not good. Which closed the ship on all sides, scarcely leaving her the sea room in which she floated. Our situation was somewhat dangerous, especially as we were compassed around by a very thick fog. We accordingly lay to, hoping that some change would take place in the atmosphere and weather. Sorry, he's leaning and he's going to fall. About 2 o'clock, the mist cleared away. Yep, Kitty's falling. No, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. It's okay, you're okay. It's okay. You can lay down. Just, there you go. Right there. I don't want you to fall. And we beheld, stretched out in every direction, vast and irregular plains of ice, which seemed to have no end. Some of my comrades groaned, and my own mind began to grow watchful with anxious thoughts, when a strange sight suddenly attracted our attention, and diverted our solicitude. You know what? I should be able to read that with ease. From our own situation. We perceived a low carriage, and fixed on a sledge and drawn by dogs, pass on towards the north at the distance of 1/2 mile, a being which had a shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat on the sledge and guided the dogs. It says sledge. I think it means sled. I guess they called it a sledge back then. We watched the rapid progress of the traveler with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. So this is the first sight of the monster. I can't remember. I don't think the monster actually has a name. This appearance excited our unqualified wonder. We were, as we believed, many hundred miles from any land, but this apparition seemed to denote that it was not, in reality, so distant as we had supposed. Shut in, however, by ice, it was impossible to follow his track, which we had observed with the greatest attention. About 2 hours after this occurrence, we heard the ground sea, and before night the ice broke and freed our ship. We, however, lay until the morning, fearing to encounter, in the dark, those large loose masses which float about after breaking up the ice. I profited of this time to rest for a few hours. So I'm probably going to have to reread the beginning of this book. I'm okay with that. Maybe I'll just do a long recording where I read, and I'll put that up on YouTube instead of just a live stream. We'll see. We'll see how much patience I have for it. In the morning, however, as soon as it was light, I went upon the deck and found all of the sailors busy, one on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge, like that we had seen before, which had drifted towards us in the night on a large fragment of ice. Oh, poor guy. Only one dog remained alive, but there was a human being within it. Oh. Okay, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other travelers seemed to be, a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered island, but a European. But it says an European because, again, back then the language is a little different. When I appeared on the deck, the master said, "Here is our captain, and he will not allow you to perish on the open sea." On perceiving me, the stranger addressed me in English, although with a foreign accent. "Before I come on board your vessel," said he, "will you have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound?" You may conceive my astonishment on hearing such a question addressed to me from a man on the brink of destruction, and to whom I should have supposed that my vessel would have been a resource which he would not have exchanged for the most precious wealth the earth can afford. I replied, however, that we were on a voyage of discovery towards the northern pole. Upon hearing this, he appeared satisfied, and consented to come on board. Good God, Margaret, if you had seen the man who thus captured, oh my God. He basically made a deal for his safety. Your surprise would have been boundless. I'll be practicing this later. Oh, Old English, I did this to myself. His limbs were nearly frozen, and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I never saw a man in so wretched a condition. We attempted to carry him into the cabin, but as soon as he quitted the fresh air, he fainted. We accordingly brought him back to the deck, and restored him to animation by rubbing him with brandy. Oh. And forcing him to swallow a small quantity. I mean, that's one way to do it. As soon as he shewed the signs of life, we wrapped him up in blankets and placed him... Well, why wouldn't you do that beforehand? And placed him near a chimney of the kitchen stove. By slow degrees he recovered, and ate a little soup, which restored him wonderfully. 2 days passed in this manner before he was able to speak, and I often feared that his sufferings had deprived him of understanding. When he had in some measure recovered, I removed him to my own cabin, and attended on him as much as my duty would permit. I never saw more interesting a creature. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness, and even madness. But there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness towards him, or does him any the most trifling service, his whole countenance is lightened up, as it were, with a beam of benevolence and sweetness that I never saw equaled. But he is generally melancholy and despairing, and sometimes he gnashes his teeth, as if impatient of the weight of woes that oppress him. No, I mean, he's got some shit on his plate. He has done some things he's not proud of. But I don't feel sorry for him. When my guest was a little recovered, I had great trouble to keep off the men, who wished to ask him 1,000 questions, but I would not allow him to be tormented by their idle curiosity. In a state of body and mind whose restoration evidently depended upon entire repose. Once, however, the lieutenant asked why he had come so far upon the ice in so strange a vehicle. His countenance instantly assumed an aspect of the deepest gloom, and he replied, to seek one who fled from me. And did the man whom you pursued travel in the same fashion? Yes. Then I fancy we have seen him, for the day before we picked you up, we saw some dogs drawing a sledge, with a man in it across the ice. Again, I know it's sled, but they write it as sledge. And I'm wondering if they actually just called it a sledge, or if I should just be pronouncing it as a normal sled. I'm not used to Old English. This aroused the stranger's attention, and he asked a multitude of questions concerning the route which the demon, as he called him, had pursued. Yet, see what I mean? I don't feel sorry for this guy. He is so mean. Soon after, when he was alone with me, he said, I have, doubtless, excited your curiosity, as well that of these good people. But you are too considerate to make inquiries. Certainly. It would indeed be very impertinent and inhuman in me to trouble you with any inquisitiveness of mine. And yet you rescued me from a strange and perilous situation. You have benevolently restored me to life. Soon after, he inquired if I thought that the breaking up of the ice had destroyed the other sledge. I replied that I could not answer with any degree of certainty, for the ice had not broken until near midnight, and the traveler might have arrived at a place of safety before that time. But of this I could not judge. From this time the stranger seemed very eager to be upon deck, to watch for the sled, which had before appeared. But I have persuaded him to remain in the cabin, for he is far too weak to sustain the rawness of the atmosphere. But I have promised that someone should watch for him to give him instant notice of any new object, or if any new object should appear in sight. Such is my journal of what relates to this strange occurrence up to the present day. The stranger has gradually improved in health, but is very silent, and appears uneasy when anyone except myself enters his cabin. Yet his manners are so consolidating and gentle. I don't know. That the sailors are all interested in him, although they have had very little communication with him. For my own part, I begin to love him as a brother. Oh. Well, we know how he loves his siblings. That's got to be very sweet. And his constant and deep grief fills me with sympathy and compassion. Oh, you have your friend. He must have been a noble creature in his better days, being even now in wreck so attractive and, oh no, amiable. Oh my. The condensed version doesn't quite go in this much detail in the letters. I said in one of my letters, my dear Margaret, that I should find no friend on the wide ocean, yet I have found a man who, before his spirit had been broken by misery, I should have been happy to have possessed as the brother of my heart. Oh, I shall continue my journal concerning the stranger at intervals, should I have any fresh incidents to record. August 13th, after my birthday. My affection for my guest increases every day. He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a creature destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief? He is so gentle, yet so wise. His mind is so cultivated, and when he speaks, although his words are cold, with the choicest art. Yet they flow with rapidity, and unparalleled eloquence, unlike mine. Unlike my words here. I've gotten way too lazy with my language. He is now much recovered from his illness, and is continually on the deck, apparently watching for the sled that preceded his own. Yet, although unhappy, he is not so utterly occupied by his own misery, but that he interests himself deeply in the employments of others. He has asked me many questions concerning my design, and I have related my little history frankly to him. He appeared pleased with the confidence, and suggested several alterations in my plan, which I shall find exceedingly useful. Oh, that's exactly what he wanted. There is no pedantry in his manner, but all he does appears to spring solely from the interest he instinctively takes in the welfare of those who surround him. I'm so sorry if you can hear my stomach. I ate, but apparently not enough. He is often overcome by gloom. And then he sits by himself and tries to overcome all that is sullen or unsocial in his humor. These paroxysms, is that how you say that? Pass from him like a cloud from before the sun, though his dejection never leaves him. I have endeavored to win his confidence. Yeah, that's right, you get that, man. And I trust that I have succeeded. Probably. One day I mentioned to him the desire I had always felt in finding a friend who might sympathize with me and direct me by his counsel. I said I did not belong to that class of men who are offended by advice. I am self-educated, and perhaps I hardly relied sufficiently upon my own powers. I wish, therefore, that my companion should be wiser and more experienced than myself, to confirm and support me, nor have I believed it impossible to find a true friend. Oh, how sweet. I agree with you, replied the stranger. I mean, you could use his name. Do you have his name well, he might not have his name yet. In believing that friendship is not only a desirable, but possible acquisition. I once had a friend, the most noble of human creatures, and am entitled, therefore, to judge respecting friendship. You have hope, and the world before you, and have no cause for despair, but I have lost everything, and I cannot begin life anew. Yes, you can. Yes, you can, you little depressed person. Again, I judge this guy because I know the story enough to judge him. If you and I'm sure most people here know the story and probably agree with that. My sympathies all go to the other being. As he said this, his countenance became expressive of a calm, settled grief that touched me to the heart. But he was silent, and presently retired to his cabin. Even broken in spirit as he is, no one can feel more deeply than he does the beauties of nature, the starry sky, the sea, and every sight afforded by these wonderful regions. Seems to still have the power of elevating his soul from earth. Such a man has a doubtful existence. He may suffer misery, and be overwhelmed by disappointments, yet when he has retired into himself, he will be like a celestial spirit that has a halo around him, within whose circle no grief or folly ventures. Will you laugh at the enthusiasm I express concerning this divine wanderer? I mean, it's kind of cute, actually. It's adorable. If you do, you must have certainly lost that simplicity which was once your characteristic charm. Yet, if you will, smile at the warmth of my expressions, while I find every day new causes for repeating them. It's adorable. It's sweet. It's okay. August 19th. We're about 6 days later. Excuse me. Drinking a bit of nameless beverage. I'll be switching back to the blue stuff after I finish my caffeine. Let's see, we have, what do we have, 4 viewers? Okay, good, that's fine. Yesterday, the stranger said to me, "You may easily perceive, Captain Walton, that I have suffered great and unparalleled misfortunes. I had determined once that the memory of these evils should die with me, but you have won me to alter my determination. You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you." I mean, they would bite you, but okay, as mine has been. "I do not know that the relation of my misfortunes will be useful to you, yet, if you are inclined, listen to my tale. I believe that the strange incidents connected with it will afford a view of nature which may enlarge your faculties and understanding. You will hear of powers and occurrences such as you have been accustomed to believe impossible. But I do not doubt that my tale conveys in its series internal evidence of the truth of the events of which it is composed. You may easily conceive that I was much gratified by the offered communication, yet I could not endure that he should renew his grief by a recital of his misfortunes." That's so sweet. "I felt the greatest eagerness to hear the promised narrative, partly from curiosity, and partly from a strong desire to ameliorate his fate." I'm not familiar with that word, but okay. "If it were in my power, I expressed these feelings in my answer. I thank you," he replied, "for your sympathy, but it is useless. My fate is nearly fulfilled. I wait but for one event, and then I shall repose in peace. I understand your feeling," continued he, perceiving that I wished to interrupt him. "But you are mistaken, my friend. If thus you will allow me to name you, nothing can alter my destiny. Listen to my history, and you will perceive how irrevocably it is determined." He then told me that he would commence his narrative the next day, when I should be at leisure. This promise drew from me the warmest thanks. I have resolved every night, when I am not engaged, to record as nearly as possible in his own words what he has related during the day. If I should be engaged, I will at least make notes. This manuscript will doubtless afford you the greatest pleasure, but to me, who know him, and who hear it from his own lips, with what interest and sympathy I shall read it in some future day. I can't imagine having a story interesting enough to tell that someone would actually write all of it down. At least not one so extensive. All of mine are short, very short. I am by birth, right, Yeah, right. I mean, there's one with a rainbow. That's the most interesting one, but it's very short. Maybe I'll tell it in a little bit. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years counselors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honor and reputation. Please stop kicking me. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and his attention to public business. I'm just not even going to try it. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country, and it was not until the decline of life that he thought of marrying and bestowing on the state sons who might carry his virtues and his name down to posterity. I mean, what about your daughters? Nobody. I mean, yes, this is back in the past. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell, through numerous mischances, into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort? How do you say his name? I'm guessing it's Beaufort. Was of a proud and unbending disposition. I could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honorable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne? Is it Lucerne or is it... It could be, I don't know. Where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship, and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. It's okay, buddy. He's twitching. He grieved also for the loss of his society, and resolved to seek him out and endeavor to persuade him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself, and it was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Ruse. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. Oh, that's so unfortunate. I'm actually going to refill that real quick. My throat gets so dry when I read. Don't worry, I have it right here. I don't have to get out. There we go. And now we are to nameless blue beverage. I think at least for the beginning of this, I'll definitely do a reread, or I'll record it and post it up. I think that'll work a little bit better. I just don't like that it kept disconnecting and breaking it up just a little bit too much. Alright, where was I? His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline, another Caroline, Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mould, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work. She plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Oh, so sad. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in attending him. Her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly, when my father entered the chamber. Oh! He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the interment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva, and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. Now, that always seems to be the case when you depend on someone like that, especially back in those days. When my father became a husband and a parent, he found this time so occupied by the duties of his new situation that he relinquished many of his public employments and devoted himself to the education of his children. Of these, I was the eldest, and the destined successor to all his labors and utility. No creature could have more tender parents than mine. Oh, how sweet! My improvement and health were their constant care, especially as I remained for several years their only child. But before I continue my narrative, I must record an incident which took place when I was 4 years of age. Okay, there's that magic number 4 again. It's gonna show up in a lot of things. I don't know what it is. Every time it comes up. It's my favorite number, though, so I don't mind. My father had a sister whom he tenderly loved, and who had married early in life an Italian gentleman. Let me get a sip. My mouth is not doing what I want it to. Soon after her marriage, she had accompanied her husband into her native country, and for some years my father had very little communication with her. About the time I mentioned she died, and a few months afterwards, he received a letter from her husband, acquainting him with his intention of marrying an Italian lady. And, oh, are you coming back? Okay, come on. Here, let me scoot back. Excuse me. Yes, I am wearing a corset. Here, come here. It's okay. What's wrong? What's wrong? Where do you want to sit? You want to stay there? You okay? Okay. You made me lose my place. Yep, now he's going to try and do it. And requesting my father to take charge of the infant Elizabeth, the only child of his deceased sister. It is my wish, he said, that you should consider her... He's shoving his butt up against me again. that you should consider her as your own daughter and educate her thus. My mother's fortune is secured to her, the documents of which I will commit to your keeping. Reflect upon this proposition and decide whether you would prefer educating your niece yourself to her being brought up by a stepmother. Cheesecake? Hi, Cheesecake. Welcome. It's so good to see you. He is very cute. Yeah, I like to keep him in fancy little sweaters. He has a little pumpkin sweater on right now. Yeah, so happy World Goth Day. You even have a little goth kitty. He's a good boy. He's just very, very pushy. Are you done? Are you done shoving your butt up against me? I would appreciate that. To not continue to be a thing. Okay, I think we might be good. My father did not hesitate, and immediately went to Italy, that he might accompany the little Elizabeth to her future home. Oh, hearts to you, Cheesecake. You're so sweet. I'm so glad you're here. Also, all must obey the Cheesecake, 'cause Chocolate's not here. Oh yeah, when are you guys going to duel? You know what, then you don't have to duel. You don't have to. Chocolate's not here. Chocolate doesn't matter. Cheesecake's here. And Cheesecake is everything. I have often heard my mother say that she was, at that time, the most beautiful child she had ever seen, and showed signs, even then, of a gentle and affectionate disposition. A lotus leaf. Oh, you're silly. You guys are silly. I love it. These indications, and a desire to bind as closely as possible the ties of domestic love, determined my mother to consider Elizabeth as my future wife. Oh, a design which she never found reason to repent. Hell yeah, Cheesecake knows. Cheesecake is everything. From this time, Elizabeth Lavenza? Yeah, Lavenza. Oh. Okay. Kitty is done. He's going to leave for a bit. There's a bunch of spiders down here running around. Actually, I'm kind of glad he's on the hunt, because one just tried to crawl up my leg. And I am very allergic. It will send me to the hospital. I have scars. It's not fun. From this time, Elizabeth Lavenza became my playfellow, and as we grew older, my friend. She was docile and good-tempered, yet gay and playful as a summer insect. Wait, insects are playful? I mean, I guess so. I've made friends with a few of them, especially cicadas, and my favorite is large moths. I like to pick them up and put them on my shoulder and just walk around with a giant moth or cicada. And usually people don't notice, or they don't think it's real until they go to touch it and it flies away. But yeah, I make friends with bugs. On a rare occasion, I'll be able to pick up a dragonfly and put it on my shoulder, but usually they just prefer to stay on the hand. And they're a little more jumpy. I've yet to tame a mantis, though. One day. I can get them on a stick, but I'm too scared to actually touch one. I don't trust them. They make eye contact. It's weird. Although she was lively and animated, her feelings were strong and deep, and her disposition uncommonly affectionate. No one could better enjoy liberty, yet no one could submit with more grace than she did to constraint and caprice. Or caprice. Her imagination was luxuriant, yet her capability of application was great. Wow, this guy really likes her. Her person was the image of her mind, her hazel eyes, although as lively as a bird's, possessed an attractive softness. Her figure was light and airy. What does that mean? Her figure was light and airy? And though capable of enduring great fatigue, she appeared the most fragile creature in the world. Yeah, okay. Oh, you want back up? Come on up. Okay, he's back. He's back on the lap. Are you done with your hunt? There we go. Good boy. Good boy. You keep those spiders away from Mommy. That's right. You keep them away. They are beautiful creatures, but nope. Just nope. While I admired her understanding and fancy, I loved to tend on her, as I should on a favorite animal. Oh. And I never saw so much grace both of person and mind united to so little pretension. A favorite animal? Okay, what is she, a pet? That's so messed up. Everyone adored Elizabeth. If the servants had any request to make, it was always through her intercession. We were strangers to any species of disunion and dispute, for although there was a great dissimilitude in our characters, there was, it says an harmony, again, the older English, there was, it's so weird to say though, there was an harmony in that very dissimilitude. I was more calm and philosophical than my companion, yet my temper was not so yielding. My application was of longer endurance, but it was not so severe whilst it endured. I delighted in investigating the facts relative to the actual world. She busied herself, stop pushing your butt on me. She busied herself in following the aerial creations of the poets. The world was to me a secret which I desired to discover. To her it was a vacancy which she sought to people with imaginations of her own. Okay, Old English. Please stop hitting me with your butt. He is determined to get my attention right now. It is very hard to resist the cuteness. My brothers were considerably younger than myself, but I had a friend in one of my schoolfellows who compensated for this deficiency. Henry Clerval was the son of a merchant of Geneva, an intimate friend of my father. He was a boy of singular talent and fancy. I remember when he was 9 years old, he wrote a fairy tale, which was the delight and amazement of all his companions. His favorite study consisted in books of chivalry and romance, and when very young, I can remember that we used to act plays, oh my goodness, Belly, composed by him out of these favorite books, the principal characters of which were Orlando, Robin Hood, Amadeus, oh, why am I so dumb, and St. George. No youth could have passed more happily than mine. Yeah, it sounds like it. You had friends. They were all nice. It sounds like you were kind of a butthole, but nobody was mean to you anyway. Lucky guy. I didn't have very many friends, but I did have my sister, and she was a good lady. She was my best friend growing up. Our studies were never forced, and by some means we always had an end place in view, which excited us to ardor in the prosecution of them. It was by this method, and not by emulation, that we were urged to application. Elizabeth was not incited to apply herself to drawing, that her companions might not outstrip her, but through the desire of pleasing her aunt, by the representation of some favorite scene done by her own hand. She learned Latin and English. Oh, good for her. That we might read the writings of those languages. Yeah. And so far from study being made odious to us through punishment, we loved application, and our amusements would have been the labors of other children. Perhaps we did not read so many books, or learn languages so quickly, as those are disciplined according to the ordinary methods. But what we learned was impressed the more deeply on our memories. No, it actually says that. I read it right. In this description of our domestic circle, I include Henry Clerval, for he was constantly with us. He went to school with me, and generally passed the afternoon at our house. For being an only child, and destitute of companions at home, his father was well pleased he should find associates at our house, and we were never completely happy when Clerval was absent. Oh, good. I feel pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood, before misfortune had tainted my mind, and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon self. But in drawing the picture of my early days, I must not omit to record those events which led, by insensible steps, to my after-tale of misery. For when I would account to myself for the birth of that passion, sorry, my contact is a little dry, which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise, like a mountain river, from ignoble and almost forgotten sources, but swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which, in its course, had swept away all my hopes and joys. Again, we know kind of what happens, and it sounds like he's just... No, you didn't... Any misery you have, my good sir, is... Well, okay, not any of it. There's some that's actually legit. But referring just to his creation, he need not be miserable. He's only making himself miserable in that case. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thanen. The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he attempts to demonstrate, and the wonderful acts which he relates, soon changed his feelings into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. I cannot help remarking here the many opportunities instructors possess of directing the attention of their pupils to useful knowledge, which they utterly neglect. My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book, and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash. Oh, my goodness, it's a child. Come on. Well, I guess he's 13. If instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that the modern system of science had been introduced, which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, because the powers of the latter were chimerical, while those of the former were real and practical, under which circumstances I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside, and with my imagination warmed as it was, I should have probably have applied myself to the more rational theory of chemistry, which has resulted from modern discoveries. That was a very long sentence. All that I just read was one sentence. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. Yeah, parents, if you don't want your kids to read something, explain it to them. Don't try to manipulate them. Don't just be like, that sucks. Or, no, that's trash. No, explain it to them. Otherwise, they're going to read it anyway. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards of Paracelsus? Pericles. Oh my goodness. Paracelsus? Pericles. I can never get that name right. And, I can read German just fine. No effort. But English, I don't know why. I have issues. It's the names. And Albertus Magnus. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. They appeared to me treasures known to few beside myself. And although I often wished to communicate these secret stores of knowledge to my father, yet his indefinite censure of my favorite Agrippa always withheld me. I disclosed my discoveries to Elizabeth, therefore under a promise of strict secrecy. But she did not interest herself in the subject, and I was left by her to pursue my studies alone. It may appear very strange that a disciple of Albertus Magnus should arise in the 18th century, but our family was not scientifical. It says scientifical. Not scientific, scientifical. And I had not attended any of the lectures given at the schools of Geneva. Not one. My dreams were therefore undisturbed by reality. You are going to fall, honey. Don't do that. And I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But the latter obtained my most undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery, if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death? Yeah, okay. That's great and terrible, especially since the population's so high now. I mean, it wasn't so high back then, but slippery slope. Nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghosts or devils was a promise liberally accorded by my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought. And if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. Oh, who's here? Definition of scientifical. So archaic. Intended to propagate knowledge. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that information. It's not a term that I'm familiar with, and you know what? I can admit when I'm not familiar with a term. There's many I am not familiar with. But thank you. It's Andy. Oh, hey, Andy. Welcome. I forgot my place. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go. The natural phenomena that take place every day before our eyes did not escape my examinations. Distillation and the wonderful effects of steam, processes of which my favorite authors were utterly ignorant, excited my astonishment. But my utmost wonder was engaged by some experiments on an air pump, which I saw employed by a gentleman whom we were in the habit of visiting. The ignorance of the early philosophers on these and several other points served to decrease their credit with me, but I could not entirely throw them aside before some other system should occupy their place in my mind. Someone's a little bit full of himself. Just a little bit. When I was about 15, very young, very full of himself. When I was about 15 years old, we had retired our house near Bellerive, when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. That sounds amazing. I love violent and terrible thunderstorms. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. Ooh, he's getting ideas. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak, which stood about 20 yards from our house. And so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. What? Could you not hit my mic, please? Okay. Here, turn around. Sit. Okay. Little jerk. Okay. He's knocking my things over. I'm so sorry. When we visited it in the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Let's see, Black Metal Werewolf. You know the story itself was created as a joke and never supposed to go anywhere. Well, yes. Actually, I did hear a bit of the backstory. It was more so they were playing a game to try to see who could scare everyone in the story circle the most, and Mary Shelley won. But I think they had to try more than once. Like, once it was her turn, she was like, yeah, let me take some time and actually write this. And then they came back later and did it. There was an episode about it on Drunk History, I think. Yeah, it was cute. It was fun. I enjoyed it. The catastrophe of this tree excited my extreme astonishment, and I eagerly inquired of my father the nature and origin of thunder and lightning. He replied, electricity, describing at the same time the various effects of that power. He constructed a small electrical machine and exhibited a few experiments. He made also a kite, with a wire and a string which drew down that fluid from the clouds. This last stroke completed the overthrow of Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and oh my God, don't make me say that name again, who had so long reigned the lords of my imagination. But by some fatality, I did not feel inclined to commence the study of any modern system, and this disinclination was influenced by the following circumstance. My father expressed a wish that I should attend a course of lectures upon natural philosophy, to which I cheerfully consented. Some accident prevented my attending these lectures until the course was nearly finished. Oh, sneaky Victor. Skipping class. I don't think I've ever actually skipped a class. Not without... Oh, Indica Ginger is hosting a stream with one viewer. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't think I skipped any classes, not without something else going on that would have had me skip the class anyway. So if there was a pep rally, okay, technically I told my class that, I was going to the pep rally, and then the pep rally, I just didn't go. Or I told the teacher in charge that I had to go to my VOTEC school, and then I just went home and played video games. It was a good day. I think my mom tried to question me about it, but then didn't care. She was too busy making soup and bread, so I didn't have to worry too much about her inquiry. I just enjoyed the day. Senior year, I didn't show up much, though. I didn't have very many classes. I had maybe 2 classes and then college classes. Nice. Yeah, I got away with it, too. Until now, if my mom watches this, she knows where I live. I might get in trouble. The lecture, being therefore one of the last, was entirely incomprehensible to me. Well, maybe you shouldn't have skipped the first ones. Don't even bother showing up to the last. The professor discoursed with the greatest fluency of potassium and boron, the sulfates and oxides, terms to which I could affix no idea. And I became disgusted with the science of natural philosophy. And what? Although I still read Pliny and Buffon with delight. Authors, in my estimation, of nearly equal interest and utility. Okay, sounds like you messed that subject up for yourself. You should have showed up to the early ones, not the last one. My occupations at this age were principally the mathematics, and most of the branches of study appertaining to that of science. I was busily employed in learning languages. Latin was already familiar to me, and I began to read some of the easiest Greek authors without the help of a lexicon. Oh, nice. I also perfectly understood English and German. I'm getting there. I'm almost back to where I used to speak. It's a little hard doing it with a game app because it's set up a little weird, and it really doesn't set you up for fluency. The only way you can really get fluent is if you have someone to speak with, if you are put into a situation to speak it, or if you watch enough media that has the language and translate it. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. If you want to learn a language, practice. This is the list of my accomplishments at the age of 17. And you may conceive that my hours were fully employed in acquiring and maintaining a knowledge of this various literature. Another task also devolved upon me, when I became the instructor of my brothers. Ernest was 6 years younger than myself, and was my principal pupil. He had been afflicted with ill health from his infancy, through which Elizabeth and I had been his constant nurses. That's nice of you. His disposition was gentle, but he was incapable of any severe application. William, the youngest of our family, was yet an infant, and the most beautiful little fellow in the world. His lively blue eyes, dimpled cheeks, and endearing manners inspired the tenderest affection. But will he stay that way? Such was our domestic circle, from which care and pain seemed forever banished. My father directed our studies, and my mother partook of our enjoyments. Neither of us possessed the slightest pre-eminence over the other. The voice of command was never heard amongst us, but mutual affection engaged us all to comply with and obey the slightest desire of each other. Oh, that's so nice. What a healthy family life. You don't see that very often. I wonder how much of that is actually true. Chapter 2. What time are we at? We're at a little over an hour. 11:52. Okay, so we're more so at 2 hours. I had to stop the stream at one point, which was unfortunate. I think I'm going to reread the beginning part and put that video up separately. I'll figure it out. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended the schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. Actually makes a lot of sense. It's a good way to learn. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery, mostly self-inflicted. Excuse me. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever, but her illness was not severe, and she quickly recovered. During her confinement, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had at first yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that her favorite was recovering, she could no longer debar herself from her society, and entered her chamber long before the danger of infection was past. Oh no. The consequences of this imprudence were fatal. On the 3rd day my mother sickened. Her fever was very malignant, and the looks of her attendants prognosticated the worst event. It was a prognosis. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of of this admirable woman did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes of the future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to your younger cousins. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." Oh, it's very sweet. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by the most irreparable evil. The void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared to be part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connexion? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time and length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My journey to Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. This period was spent sadly. My mother's death and my speedy departure depressed our spirits, but Elizabeth endeavored to renew the spirit of cheerfulness in our little society. Since the death of her aunt, her mind had acquired new firmness and vigor. She determined to fulfill her duties with the greatest exactness, and she felt that most imperious duty of rendering her uncle and cousins happy had devolved upon her. She consoled me, amused her uncle, instructed my brothers, and I never beheld her so enchanting as at this time, when she was continually endeavoring to contribute to the happiness of others, entirely forgetful of herself. That sounds great, but you need to think about yourself. You need to take care of yourself, and you need to think about your own happiness as well. I mean, there's a certain amount of, some people get great joy from making others happy, but sometimes it takes too much. I've had to learn that over the years as well. The day of my departure at length arrived. I had taken leave of all my friends, excepting Clerval, who spent the last evening with us. He bitterly lamented that he was unable to accompany me, but his father could not be persuaded to part with him. intending that he should become a partner with him in business, in compliance with his favorite theory, that learning was superfluous. Oh my god. I can't even speak today. In the commerce of ordinary life. Ugh. So sorry. Henry had a refined mind. He had no desire to be idle, and was well pleased to become his father's partner. But he believed that a man might be a very good trader and yet possess a cultivated understanding. He sat late listening to his complaints and making many little arrangements for the future. The next morning, early, I departed. Tears gushed from the eyes of Elizabeth. They proceeded partly from sorrow at my departure, and partly because she reflected that the same journey was to have taken place 3 months before, when a mother's blessing would have accompanied me. I threw myself into the chaise that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. Okay, there's a mouse in here somewhere. I, who had never been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends, and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place. I had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were being complied with, and it would, indeed, have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length, the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted, and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evenings as I pleased. Oh, you got your own apartment? That's nice. I shared a townhouse with a bunch of people, and initially had to share a room with a very nice lady. I kind of feel bad for her for having to share a room with me. It was not great. The next morning, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors, and among others to M. Krempe, professor of natural philosophy. He received me with politeness, and asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. Oh, you know, all those things that you skipped. I mentioned, it is true, with fear and trembling, the only authors I had ever read upon those subjects. The professor stared. "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued M. Krempe with warmth. "Every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost." Jeez, dude. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God, in what desert land have you lived, where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies which you have so greedily imbibed are 1,000 years old, and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew. Damn right. So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy in its general relations, and that M. Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he missed. I returned home, not disappointed, for I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor had so strongly reprobated, but I did not feel much inclined to study the books which I procured at his recommendation. M. Krempe was a little squat man, with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his doctrine. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. Oh, come on. You gotta have an open mind. Learn a variety of things. It's kind of the point of school. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand, but now the scene was changed. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Oh, I want a chimera tattoo. That's another tattoo I want. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days spent almost in solitude. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which M. Krempe, or Kremp, I could be saying that wrong, had given me concerning the lectures, and although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected that he had said of M. Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. Partly from curiosity and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room which M. Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short, but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by recapitulation of the history of chemistry, and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science, and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric, it's a weird word, upon modern chemistry. the terms of which I shall never forget. Yay, old English. It's a fun time. The ancient teachers of the science, he said, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted, and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and shew how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of the heavens, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. I departed highly pleased with the professor and his lecture, and paid him a visit the same evening. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. He heard with attention my little narration concerning my studies, and smiled with the names of Cornelius Agrippa, and that name that I don't want to read again, but without the contempt of M. Krempe had exhibited. He said that these were men whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for the most of the foundations of their knowledge. They left to us an easier task to give new names and arrange in connection classifications, the facts which they, in great degree, had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. I listened to this statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists, and I, at the same time, requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. I am happy, said M. Waldman, to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study. But at the same time, I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man who would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science, and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics. He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure, and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Imagine. Let's see, how late are we at? We're at about 12. And we can do some more, maybe do another chapter or two. We can take a quick peek. We'll see, maybe we'll do 2 more chapters. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor those works, so full of genius and discrimination, which modern inquirers have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures. Excuse my voice. Honestly, I'm not used to talking this much. 2 separate drinks. I attended the lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university. And I found even M. Krempe a great deal of sound sense and real information combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy? Physiognomy. It's a weird word. And manners. But not on that account the less valuable. In M. Waldman I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. It was, perhaps, sorry, I had a bit of lipstick on my finger. It was perhaps the amiable character of this man that inclined me more to that branch of natural philosophy which he professed, than an intrinsic love for the science itself. But this state of mind had place only in the first steps towards knowledge. The more fully I entered into the science, the more exclusively I pursued it for its own sake. That application, which at first had been a matter of duty and resolution, now became so ardent and eager, that the stars often disappeared in the light of the morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that I improved rapidly. My ardor was, indeed, the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Krempe often asked me, with a sly smile, how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst M. Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I hoped to make. That's 2 years? 2 years and you didn't visit your family. That's a little shameful. None but those who have experienced them can conceive the enticements of science. In other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there's nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit, there is continual food for discovery and wonder. A mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursues one study, must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study, and I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments. When I had arrived at this point, and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors in Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought returning to my friends and my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. No, go back to your family, at least for a little bit, at least for a visit. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice and carelessness did not restrain our inquiries. I resolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Thank you. Okay, there we go. My mouth finally did it. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. Rev DK, hey, welcome. We're still kind of at the intro here. I mean, the first few chapters are basically just Victor talking about his childhood and education. We aren't even at the monster part yet. I mean, it kind of, he showed his face in the distance, far away, but that's about it. But, hi, it's good to see you. I lost my place. Here we go. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. Why not? They're fun. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. It's about right. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses or charnel houses. I don't know how to say that. My attention was fixed upon every object, the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. So dude was just really wrapped up in his work. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. Oh. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of causation, as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life, until from the midst of the darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries toward the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Sorry, my kitty's here. No, you're not going to say hello? Okay, well, he's on my lap. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Oh, what are you doing? You okay? Okay. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. And then you regret your decisions. The astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor to arrive at once at the summit, my back is hurting, at the summit of my desires, was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world, there is no creation of the world, was now within my grasp. Now that, like a magic scene, it all opened upon me at once, the information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. You want to say hello? Okay, I'll lift him up for a second. He's a little grumpy. You want to say hello? Say hello. There's only a few people here, but that's okay. Hi, everybody. All right, can I put you down now? Here you go. There you go. Settle in. You're okay. I see by your eagerness, and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I mean, again, my sympathies are not with Victor. Are you snuggling the book? He's snuggling the book. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, my goodness, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possess the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all the intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. Yeah. Especially if you're using dead bodies, because then you get rot. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of simpler organization, but my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. Wonderful? I mean, we've done some wonderful things. Like art, it's a wonderful thing. But we've done many terrible things as well. Lots of destruction, lots of hate, lots of violence. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but thank you. Welcome. You go ahead and say hi if you want, but yes, welcome, and thank you for the follow. That was very sweet. I'm reading Old English, so my mind is at capacity. Let's see, where was I? The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Oh. Yes? Okay. Could you not? You are going to knock all of my things off the table. Do you have to be on my desk? Here, do you want to be on my shoulder? Is that better? Here. There you go. Try that. No, he's grumping. What draws you to gothness? I don't know. I just like it. It just feels comfortable to wear all black. Everything matches, and I don't know, it's just, I find it beautiful. It's just what I like. I mean, what draws anybody to anything? It's the same reason. Because you like it. Let's see. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height. 8 feet in height and proportionably large. After having formed this determination, and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials. Months. So a lot of this stuff is not fresh. Oh my. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first... Why are you doing this? Enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. Okay, here, go on. He's so grumpy. And he made me lose my place again. Alright, I'm towards the end here. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in the process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits, while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet still I clung to the hope which the next day, or the next hour, might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil? Oh, my contacts are freaking out. As I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay. Oh, going after the animals. My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance. But then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from the houses and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. Sorry, my contacts are a little dry. In a solitary chamber, or rather a cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and a staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets in attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased. I brought my work near to a conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield more luxuriant vintage. But my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature. When you get so obsessed with your work that you forget how beautiful nature is. And the same feeling which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them. Yep. and I well remember the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected. Oh, okay, I'm going to refill my drink real quick. What are we at, 12:40? We're still pretty good. Let me mark this real quick. Okay, I'm going to refill my drink real quick. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I drank all of my drink, so I had to go refill that. And we are back to chapter 3. I think I'll do the rest of chapter 3. Maybe we'll do chapter 4 as well. I knew well, therefore, that would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed. I've had a few projects where I became absolutely obsessive with it. Then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my neglect to vice, or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. Well, yes, you are neglecting your family. Should probably be in contact with them at least a little bit. I mean, you don't have to talk to them every day, but reach out a little bit. A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind. You don't always need a calm and peaceful mind. It's just part of being human is having expression. And never allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. Again, you are human. You need to have expression and passion. It's a beautiful thing, even when it isn't a beautiful thing. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections, and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful. That is to say, not befitting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquillity of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. Yeah. The thing is, America was not discovered, it was invaded. But I forget that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. Yes, get to it. He hasn't even started, really. We're on chapter 3, and he has not started. This is all intro. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight. So deeply I was engrossed in my occupation. The leaves that year had withered before my work drew near to a close, and now every day shewed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. So in Old English, instead of it being showed, it was shewed, which is an interesting thing to try to get used to while reading this. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, as is mine every day. And I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade, than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree, a disease that I regretted the more because I had hitherto enjoyed most excellent health, and had always boasted of the firmness of my nerves. But I believed that exercise and amusement would soon drive away such symptoms, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. And technically, he did get both of those. running across like half the world chasing this thing. Well, it's not really a thing. It's a guy, it's a person. It was on a dreary night of November. Oh, yes, this is chapter 4, so I am going to read chapter 4. We're on chapter 4. It was a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I feel that every day, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. Finally, chapter 4, the monster is here. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how to delineate? The wretch with which infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. Ooh. So, he's goth. That's not so bad. Again, he actually doesn't sound as ugly as it's being described. But this is why you should work with fresh body parts. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that had far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Why, though? Why? Because he looks a little ugly? You succeeded, you created life. And he's not immediately ripping you apart. I mean, that's not a failure. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Oh. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretched, the miserable monster whom I had created. It's so fucking mean. He doesn't even give him a name. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. Oh. Oh. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed down the stairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Again, dude's not even trying to attack you, and you're not even giving him a chance. You are the monster, Victor. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy, again endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. Man, you are mean. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. You are so mean. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others I nearly sank to the ground through the languor, and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Again, he's judging based on mere appearance. For shame, Victor. For shame. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although wetted by rain which poured from the black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring, by bodily exercise, to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was, or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. It's a little poem. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which the various diligence and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused, I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and, on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed he, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts of my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. "What horror and misfortune? Nothing has happened to you." I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, and in the most cordial manner, and we walked toward my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends, and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great was I Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. The difficulty to persuade my father that it was not absolutely necessary for a merchant not to understand anything except a bookkeeping. And indeed, I believe, did I skip a page? No. Okay, and indeed, I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same of that of the Dutch schoolmaster in the Vicar of Wakefield. "I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek." But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. Okay, a little late though. "It gives me the greatest delight to see you. But tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, and very happy. Only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself. But, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, I did not before remark how very ill you appear. So thin and pale, you look as if you had been watching for several nights." "You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see. But I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free." Wow, you just walked out of your apartment and want to pretend like, okay, I'm done now. This guy's a real jerk. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less to allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there. You think? Alive, and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in the waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me, but when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clairvaux. This guy, seriously, your enemy? You created this person. You built him. You built him the way he is. He hasn't done anything to you but try to talk to you. Pimp my Pepsi. Oh, hi. Oh, we're just reading a bit of Frankenstein for World Goth Day. We're on chapter 4, I believe. And the monster's created. It is alive. Today's World Goth Day? Yes, it is. Well, I mean, technically we're in the next day because it's 1:06 a.m. But, last night or tonight, whatever you consider it, before midnight was World Goth Day. Yes. And, of course, me being of the Gothic nature, wanted to celebrate with a little bit of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I was reading another book called Murmurs in the Dark, and we'll go back to that eventually. Frankenstein isn't exactly long anyway. But yes, welcome. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast. You have a servant? Man, this guy. But I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clairvaux at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what, for God's sake, is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill are you? What is the cause of all of this?" Your friend's an asshole. That's the cause of all of it. He's a terrible person. "Do not ask me," I cried, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me, save me!" I imagined that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously, and fell down in a fit. Poor Clairvaux! What must have been his feeling? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy, so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless, and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. Excuse me, my voice is cracking a little bit. Oh, that should be a little better. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. Oh my goodness. During all of that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and firm in the hope that he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. Again, this event's only terrible because he made it terrible. Ugh. How many viewers are we at? No, we've got 4 viewers. Oh, there's that magic number. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects, and with any kind of pleasure, I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. Again, little drama queen here, Victor. Drama llama. Yeah, no one feels bad for you. You're like a wealthy, spoiled kid that decided to create something/someone, and then you judged that being based on their physical appearance and did not give them a chance. Dearest Clerval, exclaimed I, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion. But you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself. But get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on the subject, may I not? I trembled. One subject, what could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of color. I will not mention it, if it agitates you. But your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been, and are uneasy at your long silence. Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here for some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. We are at about 1:14 in the morning. It's been a couple of hours. I think I might call it a night right now, just because my voice needs some rest. And we will continue this on Tuesday. So I will be reading chapter 5 then, or I might even start over because of the connection issues. Hopefully I can get some of the technical stuff figured out. But let's see if we can find somebody to raid real quick. see. Is there anybody on? It doesn't look like anybody's on. Oh no. Okay, well, I was going to try to do that. Okay, well, I guess we'll just have to do that next time then. But for now, I thank you all for joining me in this reading. I apologize again for all of the technical issues and my own difficulties in reading older English. I tend to struggle with that. Yet German, effortless. I can read German anytime. But I'll be practicing on that. Hopefully I'll get better as we go along in this book. Now, if you have any requests or suggestions for things that I should read, please let me know. It does have to be in the public domain, or I have to have the expressed and written permission of the person who holds the copyright, whether it be the author or the publisher. I don't know. It's different for different things, but I'm happy to read to anybody. Hopefully it helps somebody sleep. All right. Thank you again for joining me. And you have a good night and happy World Goth Day.